So I'm really happy to be here today, and I'm really honored to be chatting with you all. I was actually joking with Doug McMillan before today about our expert status in the titles for today's seminar. I'm not sure I would maybe define myself as a fundraising expert per se, but I do also just want to recognize that we have so many great fundraisers in the virtual room today, and I continue to just be inspired and learn from many of you as well. So thank you for the incredible work that you're doing in the community. If you haven't heard the, I'd say, ominous news yet, the Ontario Not-for-Profit Network has come out with a study that they estimate that 1 in 5 not-for-profit organizations will cease to exist after this year. That's really concerning news when you think about all of the vital supports provided in our community through not-for-profit organizations. And along with those financial pressures, there's a lot of ways that our world is evolving in really positive ways. Also changes to donor demographics, giving preferences. There's just a lot of things that we need to be on top of when we are looking at our fundraising. Like, we don't have enough to think about already in our day-to-day. But today I'm just going to share some of my perceptions about 5 things that I feel like you just really can't afford to ignore in your fundraising. And, joining the United Way team recently, to me, it's something that's really important as a major fundraiser in the community. For us as an organization to also empower all of you as well, so that you can think about how to be more effective and successful in your fundraising. Some of these things are newer topics to me, so I maybe can't necessarily say they work per se. So I'm a bit on this journey with you. There we go. All right, so I know that especially right now, fundraising can be super stressful. So we're just going to do a quick poll because I'm really curious, what is currently stressing you out the most about your fundraising? So we've got, the impact of COVID-19, competition potentially for donor dollars, you just don't know where to focus. Community perceptions, donor perceptions, or lack of trust in charities, not enough hours in the day. What are sort of your pressure points right now? Give a few moments. All right, so we've got a bit of a mixed bag and some all of the above, which I totally get. But looks like the top 2 are competition for donor dollars and impact of COVID-19. So those are 2 things I'm going to touch on a little bit in today's presentation. So hopefully I can help ease some of that stress. So let's get started with the 5 things that you can't ignore. Oh. Obviously, COVID-19, even if you wanted to ignore it, I don't think we can right now. Someone in business development told me yesterday that the projections around businesses are actually quite similar to that not-for-profit study. And Kim from PIN actually shared a story this morning that I think it was 1 in 7 small businesses could cease to exist after this year. So we're potentially having that along with some people losing their jobs, so we could be operating in an environment with a smaller donor pool. Also, we have certain types of fundraising that we've traditionally relied on that we can't do right now due to restrictions. So it is something that is, I think, kind of overwhelming. Also, just with the stress and anxiety of the entire situation, it can feel a little bit icky to be asking our donors for money right now. So hopefully most of this isn't news to most of you, but if you're at all hesitant still, I just wanted to share some motivations here to think about. And I think number 1, it's just really important to not assume it's a no. and really be leading with empathy and asking permission. And I think that this was actually a big aha for me early on. And it's kind of funny because I think it's actually one of the earliest lessons in fundraising, right? That the number one reason why people don't give is because they weren't asked. So I think we need to remember that right now during COVID. But my gut instinct at first was like, stop all communications, we need to be sensitive. But from what I've seen, there really are a lot of people that want to help and are still able and willing to give. I think the challenge is that we need to be really intentionally connecting with people because building a virtual relationship with our donors requires a lot more sort of skillful conversation and empathy. So it's something that we have to work a little bit harder on. But I think the great news is that connecting with donors can actually be a little bit easier because it's less effort than going into an office or meeting, being able to connect via Zoom or the phone. So that can make life a little bit easier. So this is simple stuff, but I've just found success really in making sure that you lead with that empathy, start with like how things are going with you, how's things with your business, and really understanding sort of where they're at with sort of maybe their ability to give. You might get a 20-minute answer, but that helps with that relationship building. And then the other thing I'm really liking is the permission aspect because that kind of sets the stage with the current situation and saying things like, what's your timing like for this year? What's your ability like this year for considering an ask? So just being empathetic to sort of their situation before you're actually, making an ask to them. I actually remember years ago getting a call from a donor who was angry because they weren't asked when our organization was in a challenging time. And that really taught me a lesson that we have to give people an opportunity to say no. I had thought we had asked this individual too much, so I didn't want to ask again, but he was actually more offended that we didn't ask him. So we can't assume that people aren't able to give or don't want to. If people really believe in what we do and they want to be here for us and they want to hear from us. So it's something that we really have to do with the people that we already have relationships with. Now, don't fear if you don't have these relationships yet, because I have heard a lot and experienced a lot of success as well with acquiring new donors, especially through direct mail. So to achieve these new donations, I think it's really important that you're demonstrating your relevance and your agility at this time, being really especially mission focused. How are you still delivering your services? Why is your mission important right now, especially? And I've heard so many inspiring stories from our community about organizations who have pivoted their services to make things happen. And I think that these are the things that are really going to connect with new donors and maybe connect to them in a new way that can be a longer term relationship. So it's actually a bit of an opportunity right now. Of course, with COVID, we also have to be really agile and accelerated kind of from a digital sense. So as much as possible, we need to be present on all platforms and make sure that we're really responsive because things are happening really fast. So something, and this one's a bit of a joke, and I think Colleen from our team is online, but I was joking about this the other day with her, isn't everything a COVID response at this point? But I think that what I meant by this is there has been a lot of opportunities with foundations, government funding, and United Way funding. So just make sure that you're keeping an eye on these right now and that you're thinking about it strategically, not only with the short term. And I think that a lot of the funders, including us, are open to having conversations about how we can, make the best impact and make it work for your needs right now. So don't shy away from having those conversations with your foundations and funders as well. So I've seen a lot of really specific examples during COVID, and I wasn't going to share that today, but someone had actually asked that in the questions prior to the event. So what I actually wanted to do was just invite anyone who has done something that's been successful for your organization during COVID. I would love if you would just share any ideas with your peers here today in the chat windows. So we just invite people to share things that have been working. Seen a lot of creativity with virtual style events, things like 50-50 fundraisers, different things. So we just invite people to share if you have an idea that you're willing to share to encourage others. So next up, I want to talk about ultra transparency because transparency just isn't enough anymore, unfortunately. And I know that this can be frustrating at times because it can take so much time, administrative time for us to be transparent. But I think now with some of the recent events and as well how quickly social media can light up, I believe that we really need to just go above and beyond with transparency. And you might say, this isn't fundraising, why are you talking about this? But as Mark Bloomberg says here, proactive transparency is very inexpensive compared to the consequences of not being transparent. So I would argue that actually it is, because transparency is a way that you are going to help acquire and retain donors. So along with worrying about your revenue right now, we need to be worried about our revenue 5 years from now. And I think that a big part of that is building trust with our donors. I've always actually been really committed to ethics and transparency. And back in the day, there used to be the Imagine Canada ethical code. And one of my board chairs used to joke that I would sleep with it under my pillow. But that might be a bit extreme, but I think it is something that we just really have to keep it so front of mind all the time. So, and I think that, you know, it just goes beyond just posting a PDF on your website. Like that's a great start and something that you have to do at the very least, but it's super, super important. So this may seem really obvious, but make sure you're filing accurate reporting. And this is well placed with being here with RLB today. Many of us work with them as auditors, but I think that just making sure, don't just say that transparency is a value for your organization, make sure that it's backed up with actions. And one of the things, many things I think that came out of the We Charity situation is that there can be many complexities with how we need to do our reporting. So it's so important that we understand those complexities. And if you are looking in sort of charting new waters with your fundraising methods, make sure that you're seeking legal advice if it is something that's a bit unusual, because you want to make sure that you're doing that reporting properly. But at the very basic, make sure you're filing that T3010 and think about actually that how the data is presented and your financial statements actually as a storytelling opportunity. Now, I don't mean storytelling like a fairy tale, but I mean, think about what message you want to get across with your financial statements and how the information is presented and how the notes are on there. So one of the things that came front of mind for me is being on the chair of the Family and Children's Services Board. They're primarily funded by the government, but we do also rely on donations. So there's a note in our statements that says that on economic dependence. And so if you were to read that as a donor, you might think, oh, well, they just rely on government funding. I don't need to donate to them. So we just added in a quick little line. However, the organization also relies on fundraising activities and other external funding in order to ensure it can deliver all of its required programs. And people do read these financial statements. I don't know if you've ever looked at your download stats on your website, but it always shocks me how many people are looking at them. So I think that it's really important that you put those types of notes in there to help tell that story that you want to tell. Now, make sure you don't spin it. Now, this might seem like I'm contradicting myself a little bit because I said tell a story with your statements, but now I'm saying don't spin it. But I think what I mean here is just like keep it simple. Don't inflate your numbers. Don't give too much information. That's going to be confusing. The public should be able to find real information about your operations on your website and easily find it. And they should really understand how their donation is going to be used. And once they donate, how their donation is used. So it's not just about transparency. This is also donor engagement and is super important right now in our current environment. Make sure that you're having honest conversations about the future and mistakes. And this one I actually love because I think I've built some of my strongest donor relationships through difficult conversations, because I think when you are upfront and talking through difficult challenges, it actually builds a stronger relationship. And in fact, I actually had one of these just yesterday where I had a donor call and he was actually disappointed with how he was being communicated with. He wasn't feeling appreciated or that he had the information that he was wanting. And we had a really honest conversation just about sort of where we've been as an organization, what our plans are for the future. And he said after, like it was totally refreshing to just sort of talk through that and feel heard. And at the end of the conversation, he actually ended up increasing his annual gift. So just encourage you not to sort of glaze over any of those difficult things that happen, but just be honest and real about some of the situations that are behind those sorts of situations. I think that just making sure that you're being proactively honest as well is very important, because it's better than, sort of things coming out after the fact. So all of these actions, although not necessarily active fundraising activities, like I said, they're really going to build stronger relationships and help you acquire new donors. And I'll get to that a little bit later when we're looking at some of the growing donor groups, and some of which are really looking for transparency. So next up, very interrelated with transparency, standing up for our sector. Now, investing wisely in the right areas allows us to reach more people and create more impact, not waste more money. So I'm just getting so tired. I've been talking about this lately, and maybe it's just the COVID and the strain that I've seen on our staff and the staff in the community. I'm just so tired of hearing about how crappy our computers are, how passionate we all are, but underpaid, how many hats we all wear. And yes, I know there's many funders that don't want to fund operations or staff. So we're still working, within a bit of a limited box or an environment. But I think we need to take some responsibility for this, because I think we're fueling the fire a little bit. So let's just talk about that a little bit more. So I know we're really limited right now, and most of us don't have a lot of money to invest in sort of new operational elements, but I think just in the future that just making sure that you are investing smartly with your organization and choosing investments that really match your goals, because those types of investments are really easy, I think, to have conversations with your donors to help them really recognize the importance of these investments in our operations. As funders, we need to really recognize the importance of these investments. And again, getting back to the honest and transparent conversations, we need to be making the case for these investments as much as possible to donors and funders. I know we might shy away from it because we're used to donors and funders not wanting to fund that stuff, but let's just keep trying, because I think that we have a responsibility here to help shift the future of this conversation. And let's not fuel the fire, like I said. So a tribute to Dan Plata's TED Talk. But like I said, it's more than just donors that need to change their mindset. So I really just try to answer questions about overhead a lot differently now. 10 years ago, I was all about like driving that number, that admin percentage down, saying, like we're the lowest in town or whatever it is. But now I'm talking about more being responsible with our decisions, on being effective, on making strategic directions. If your administrative spending goes up, explain why, because this gets back to the transparency. But we need to tell that story on our annual reports, our website, or to donors directly, why those investments are important for our organization. So why I think this is important as a fundraising trend is that if we continue to sort of perpetuate the lack of investment in our operations with how we're reporting and speaking to our donors, then I think we're really going to talk ourselves out of a job. We're going to burn ourselves out, we're going to burn our staff out, and no one is going to change the perceptions of our donors but us. So I know it's scary because it might mean, not getting funding, or we're used to kind of caving to maybe what a funder wants, but let's just try to start having more of those conversations. So next up, let's just talk about the changing landscape with donors. I think this stuff is actually super exciting because finally we're seeing sort of some changes in sort of the donor landscape. So I just wanted to share a couple of stats here. So from KCI, across Canada, private financial wealth has never been more abundant or more concentrated. That's actually sad from an equity point of view, but in the coming decade, the wealth of households with more than $1 million in assets is expected to grow by 78%. Plus, women now control an increasing percentage of wealth in our community. Finally. And finally, a greater percentage of today's wealthy are self-made and have different attitudes and perceptions. So we really need to be paying attention to these types of trends and what that means for what donors are going to be looking for. Also from Charity Village, understanding and engaging with Canada's immigrant mosaic is a business imperative. 1 in 5 Canadians are immigrants, and 3/4 of newcomers give to charities, and their donations rise within their years in Canada. So what does that mean for us? I think as a starting point that if we are going to connect, with these diverse groups, that we need to have diverse perspectives on our team. And this kind of led to my question with Dana around culture, because I think that just making sure that we have that diversity in in race, in age, in all the different ways that we need to is going to help us to connect to different donor groups or volunteer groups. And I think that it's really important that we start there. So we really need that diversity and perspectives. Our supporters want to see that on our staff, and we need to really just make that conscious effort. So what does that mean in a fundraising context? Well, can some of your team maybe speak other languages? Can you understand donor motivations of varying cultures or varying ages? Really understanding that with how you can connect to those people will be truly valuable to your organization. How do you make a compelling case, but express it in different ways? Now, that one just felt a little bit overwhelming to me because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we're having to rewrite everything 10 times to appeal to different people. But I think that thinking through what different people are going to be looking for is super important. So next up, we really need to continue to focus on major giving. And I'm not sure that this is a surprise to most people, and obviously the deep and meaningful relationships. So going back to that KCI research, that the wealth of households with more than $1 million in assets is expected to grow by 78%. So that just really means that we're going to have people with a large capacity to give. So it's important that we continue to focus on a major giving strategy. And I think that going back to sort of that diversity and what people are looking for, that it's super important that we're thinking about the different motivations of an individual, but also I think understanding some of the data around motivations around certain, let's say like generations or whatever it is, can help us with our communication so we are appealing to those groups. So for example, what I read is that women tend to put more research into charities before giving, and they prefer long-term and honest relationships with the charities that they support. So now think back to what I said around that ultra transparency, the need to do that, and then the fact that wealth with women is increasing, that's where those link up. If we're being really transparent and there's more women that are doing that research and seeing that information on our website, that's going to help us better sort of link up with that growing giving group. So of course, we also need to tailor to multi-generational giving preferences. And with that, I think that, like I said before, it's just like the different styles of communications and, being present on different platforms. As well, there's definitely differences with how younger generations are wanting to give or what they're going to feel passionate about. So it's something that we need to be thinking about. So yes, this is totally overwhelming. So it's like, how can I do all million of these things? But I think if we think about each of those groups, it can help you decide where you need to focus as an organization. So for example, I saw some data that preferred causes around women in general are poverty, health, children, women's rights, and education. For newcomers and second-generation Canadians, the importance of giving local is key, and giving is rooted in empathy and strong family and religious values. So if you start looking at those sorts of data, you can kind of figure out, okay, I work in poverty reduction. So I think there's an opportunity for here to look at how we can increase our major gifts with women and how you can do some stuff to engage with them on that regard. So I think it's just hopefully a way to help you focus rather than overwhelming you. All right, so number 5, I actually very recently learned about community-centric fundraising. So it's something that's really new to me, but a journey that I'm on, I would say, individually, and something that I really see an important part of the future of our local United Way here. I first heard about it on a podcast, and let me tell you, some of the elements of it like shook my foundation as a fundraiser because it really shifted my views on a few things. This one, as opposed to some of the other things, this isn't a trend. This is a shift that is necessary and I believe is our responsibility as the not-for-profit sector. So let's talk about this a bit more. Community-centric fundraising is a fundraising model that is grounded in equity and social justice. We prioritize the entire community over individual organizations, foster a sense of belonging and interdependence, present our work not as individual transactions but holistically, and encourage mutual support between nonprofits. Doesn't that just sound so amazing? And this makes me think of some of the things that Julia mentioned earlier with 10C. So this is where my fundraiser totally got shook. No more donor-centered fundraising. So those of you that know me will understand how this like hit me deep, because I have like raised the flag around donor-centered fundraising for years. But, you know, and it was really based on the, you know, it's all about you as a donor. Like, we don't do anything. Every thank you letter is just like you, giving all of the credit to the donor, making the donor into the hero who comes into the to save the day. And it never really hit me about how this really reinforces inequities in our community. And we're really othering other people in our community that we're trying to support and lift up by separating those two groups. And it's something that, especially those of us that are working in sort of basic needs or poverty reduction initiatives, something that's just really not cool for us to be doing. I think we're creating more stigma. So we really need to shift to fostering more of a sense of belonging and a sense of community. So we're doing this together. We're in this together, you know, what we're hearing about from during COVID. And I think, you know, like, we can still have donor love, that's important, but let's just not idolize our donors. We can appreciate them, but they're not heroes any more so than, you know, the rest of our community are. So we really need to prioritize community results as well. And like I said, I think this really came through with what 10C is doing. I've heard about so many amazing partnerships and collaborations that have been happening through COVID, and it really demonstrates what we can achieve as a community. So telling those stories, I think, they're important to have them happen, but also telling them are really strong and really important. And I think that not great things can happen when we and our boards focus too much on the achievements of our organization rather than the betterment of the broader community. Our community is best served if we see ourselves as part of the bigger picture. So this made me really reflect back to sort of my earlier days when I was at the Children's Foundation, because I was really like focused on sort of the output numbers. And so each year it was like, okay, we need to provide more financial assistance to more kids and more adoptive family and more of all of that. And then one day it hit me, that's not the win. The win is when these numbers go down because children don't have that need anymore. So I think that's just shows what can happen when you're getting too focused about sort of the growth as an organization and not actually the outcomes that are happening due to your work. So I really love some of these principles that are a part of it that we we must not let fear, scarcity mindset, or survival tendencies to drive our decisions and actions when relating to other organizations. We must collaborate with organizations whose missions are interconnected with ours and support them to ensure they are also strong. We must give credit to other nonprofits publicly. So I think that just that collaborative approach and us working together, like I said, it's been happening really wonderfully through COVID. So let's do that more partnership, more sort of networked opportunities and achieving a greater good in our community. Now, the last point here, I think that at times we can often neglect or take for granted our staff, our board members, and our volunteers and clients. It's important that we appreciate all of those groups just as much as our donors. So that's something that I think goes back to standing up to our sector, but we need to, like I said, pay our staff fairly. We also need to appreciate time and in-kind support as much as cash support. And this is something I think, talking about the gig economy, for example, we're going to have more people that are maybe willing to do that type of in-kind work and can really help us with our organization. So it's a bit of shift in sort of what we're valuing and focusing on as our fundraising. So this is definitely a shift in, I guess, how we're communicating with our donors. And like I said, the donor love is still really important. But I think that when we're talking about sort of competing for donor dollars, that I do really feel that a community-centric approach will build up all of our success as fundraisers and get away from maybe that mindset of scarcity. Because I think that the more that we're celebrating each other and partnering and, you know, doing networked approaches, that it's going to be valued by a lot of our donors. And those are the types of things that I think people are going to really want to get behind. So, and I also just want to just specifically mention again that it's important that we appreciate our clients, or as much as we appreciate our donors, because that's something too, that's part of it that I think is really important. They aren't just recipients of services, but they are contributors to our community. So like I said, community-centric fundraising is relatively new to me, but I'm really inspired by it as United Way. I think it's really imperative that we shift in this direction, and you know, that our fundraising is grounded in equity, that we focus on a sense of belonging and not othering, that we focus more on collaboration and collective impact, really lean into that. I'm really excited about the path of what that could do here in our community, and I really hope that you'll join us on this journey. So before I wrap up, I actually just wanted to have a moment because I know many of you are fundraisers and that stress is high, as you noted in that poll. So what I actually want to do here is I actually want to ask everyone to stand up quickly. So hopefully you'll do this with me. All right, and I'd like you to say out loud with me this mantra. So this is a fundraising office, treasury of the voluntary sector, engine room of change. We convert ideas into funds to achieve great impact. From this place, we connect people who want to change the world with those who can. We underrate charities' successes and insure against their failures. Friend, you stand on sacred ground because this is a fundraising office. I want to make sure that you're all taking time to celebrate what you do and how important and valuable you are to our community. And I hope that some of these thoughts helped you get out of the weeds a little bit today and think about sort of the future of your organization and some of the things that you can do to help invest in sort of in your sustainability. Thank you so much for being here today. And I do have my social tag on here, Glenna SK, pretty active on Twitter if you want to connect with me. You can also email me at Glenna, I didn't put on here, but glenna@unitedwayguelph.com. I love talking about any of this stuff, so I would be happy to connect. And if we do have time here and there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Glenna. We do have one. Before I get to that, though, I wanted to mention on your Twitter handle, I always read it, having kind of followed you on Twitter for ages, I always read it as Glenn Ask, like a combination of Glenna Ask, like, you know, some people say so-and-so speaks or whatever. And I just suddenly realized yesterday when I was flipping through your feed to come up with the point I raised, that it's SK at the end because you're from Saskatchewan. So
Yes.
we do have a cross-Canada panel here too. So the question that I saw was around what would be one resource you would recommend around community-centric fundraising?
So there is actually a website. If you Google community-centric fundraising, it has a lot of great, it's pretty new, but there's actually 10 principles to community-centric fundraising that you can sort of take and potentially evolve for your organization. It's not necessarily that you have to sign up for theirs, but they're trying to encourage sort of the adaptation of those principles. So that's really what I would like to look at, is taking those, you know, for the work that we do, and sort of committing to those principles within there. Some of them go pretty deep, so it can be some heavy work, but I'd really encourage checking out the website. And there actually is a podcast that is tied to the website as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. And there is a second question here. The question is, Glenna, do you have any thoughts on fundraising for not-for-profits who are not able to issue tax receipts? Is being able to issue receipts a major factor? Is that shifting in your view?
I feel like that's shifting. I don't know. I just feel like it's not as important as it used to be. I think that's sort of more of a traditional viewpoint. I don't know if others feel that, but I feel like I get that question sort of less from the beginning, where people would say like, oh, can I get a tax receipt for this? Or maybe with certain events where you used to give like a partial tax receipt and then you had to shift to no tax receipt. I don't feel like people have been upset by that generally. So I think that, you know, one of the great things that's happening with sort of our generational shift is there's just so much more focus on impact. And so I really feel that storytelling and focus on the change that is happening with your work is going to be way more powerful than promoting the option of getting a tax receipt. So I hope we continue to go down that road.
Great, thank you. I think, unless I'm missing any, those were the two questions. So thank you again, Glenna. I really appreciate your insight, some great comments in the chat as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.